So I accidentally
Ah,
started quilting. And he said, well, that's an art quilt. And I went, oh, no, it couldn't be. Art is hard. Selling art is hard. Making art is hard. Being inspired is hard. And trying not to be overwhelmed by all the beautiful things that other people are making is
hmm.
hard too. One idea, it grows into another. I always tell other artists, act on those harebrained ideas.
Oh, wow.
And I made three different pieces using that Steinway.
Okay.
Now that I've moved to this church and have a sanctuary sized fiber art studio.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for so much for joining me. I know a few things about you, so let me just go over what it is that I know, and then we can talk about them in depth after this. Okay.
Excellent.
I know that you're a full-time artist who works with textiles amongst other material. I know that you have a Columbus, Ohio connection, which is where I live. I know that you've been an artist in residence, and I'm kind of curious about how that all works. And I know that you've done exhibitions throughout the country. So know that you make works in a series, and you worked in series like mandalas, stained glass series, quilts, including your grave rubbing quilts. So let's just talk about some of those things. Since this is a quilt channel, let's talk about your quilts first. You made quilts and other art that doesn't involve fabric and quilts. What's your take on quilts as like an art or a craft?
The age old debate between art and craft
Mhm.
has been going on for longer than I've been alive, and it will be continuing long after I am dead.
Mhm.
Um, I like to joke with fine artists, especially like my mentor. His name is Stephen Chesley, and he has been self sustaining for the last 40 years as an impressionistic oil painter.
Mhm.
But I'll joke with him that I'm also a fine artist, except when it's more advantageous for me to be a craft artist, because my approach is primarily embroidery. And embroidery has no function. You
Oh,
sew a dress, you can sew a quilt. These are functional, but there is no function to embroidery. It is strictly for embellishment and to add something to another object
mhm.
in a decorative way.
That's true.
So, as far as I am concerned, it is a perfect example as to how these ideas are totally blended.
Right.
Can a painting be functional? Well, yeah, if you put it on as a cabinet door for your kitchen,
Oh, that's true.
then it's functional.
Right.
These are definitions and issues that I leave up to critics and people who want to spend their time outside of their studio discussing things of this nature.
Right.
The rest of us, like me, I'll just go into my studio and make something.
Right.
Let it be determined what it is
That's
by
a good
somebody
idea.
else.
So, as you go through doing your exhibitions, have you found that the definition has changed? Can people see quilts as art more often now than they used to, or?
Well, can I back up into how I ended up making quilts?
Absolutely.
Okay, I just explained that as an embroiderer,
Hmm.
I consider it fine art. I was years ago doing embroidery in a series, because yes, I do work in series called my Decision Portrait series.
Okay.
Was xylene photo transfers of real people onto which I stitched words that reflect their real life decisions.
Hmm.
The very first one was my sister Wanda. The stitched words were one day at a time. The
Okay.
title was 25 Years Sober. It's almost now been 40 for
Oh,
Wanda.
that's awesome.
But I started with a long wish list of decisions I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of decisions, whether to get a mastectomy or to have chemotherapy if you were facing breast cancer, to
Mm-hmm.
have an abortion or to give up a child by adoption.
Mm-hmm.
These are decisions that, and there ended up being like 108 of them.
Oh, wow. It's a
And a
lifetime
series
decision.
of them were exhibited at the Houston Quilt Show a number of years ago.
Okay.
Uh, you know, but my approach, I had this wish list and I didn't know who was going to volunteer and provide a picture of themselves.
Right.
So I knew that I had to make a few things stable. So they were going to be black and white xylene photo transfers
Mm-hmm.
onto unbleached or tea stained muslin.
Can
And
you,
I
can I
had
stop
this
you for a second? Tell me what xylene photo transfer is.
It's a chemical that is really toxic and I don't recommend it. And if I were to do it again, I would use a print on demand service to get the
Okay.
pictures onto the fabric.
Okay.
But I didn't know about that at the
Right.
time. And so I started off with this xylene that takes the ink of a photocopy and with a lot of scrubbing on the back,
Mm-hmm.
transfers that ink onto a piece of fabric.
Okay.
The advantage to that is photocopy ink is carbon based and not light sensitive.
Mm.
So, that there was a good thing to it, but it's
Right.
totally toxic. It smells like terrible. And, it's not good on your skin and you have to wear a mask and all that crap.
Right.
But I had this really super cool decorative paper that sort of looked like the craters of the moon and it had that texture. So
Mm-hmm.
I wanted my photos, the black and white on the muslin to go on this. Only the background paper was really wrinkly. So I just put this layer of felt in between and
Mm-hmm.
I let all the edges show. So the felt was a little larger than the xylene on the muslin and the decorative paper was a little larger than that. And then I stitched it all together.
Mm-hmm.
That is the definition of an art quilt.
Yeah, definitely.
3 layers held together by stitch.
That's true.
So I accidentally
Ah.
started quilting. I was so surprised when it was a man by the name of Duncan Slade. He and his wife, Gail Ferris, I could be pronouncing that wrong, had 3 different art quilts in Robert Shaw's definitive volume of the art quilt. And he was the studio manager at the McNamara Foundation for my very first art residency. And
Mm.
he looked at my embroidery. I was stitching at the time on blood donor, 1 drop at a time.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's an art quilt. And I went, oh no, it couldn't be. There's no piecing. I'm afraid. I admire quilts, especially traditional quilts,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no possibility I could get all 4 corners to come together in one spot.
Right.
The idea of binding, oh, please shoot me dead. The idea that it's going to be the same amount on the front as the back, or even on the front, this is beyond my capabilities. So I protested and said, oh no. And that's when he explained it was an art quilt.
Right.
And it led me to investigate what art quilting was.
Mm.
Um, Even during that residency, I stumbled in, it was in Maine, and I stumbled into the Atlantic bookstore in Narragansett. No, Damariscotta. That was it. And the first title right in front of the door was Jeannie Williamson's book, The Uncommon Quilter. I'm like, uncommon? Heck, I didn't even know I was doing it. So I bought the book
Mm-hmm.
and read to page, I think it's 83, could be 85. Jeannie suggested taking a crayon and a piece of fabric and making a grave rubbing.
Mm.
And that started an entire series and an installation idea that took me on an adventure for the next several years. And actually, knowingly putting together vintage materials and these grave rubbings in layered, stitched ways.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was later in Quilt National 2013. Um, I'm excited when I get some time to look on social media, because I understand that the Quilt National acceptances just went out. This year, I didn't even enter. I didn't have anything that I felt that strongly about, that I hadn't committed someplace else. But it was very exciting that the adventure from embroidery brought me to quilting and got me into a show like that. So that's part of why I use unconventional materials, mostly because I was always doing that. I
Right.
just didn't know I was quilting.
I love your gray ribbon quilts. Those are awesome.
Mhm.
Tell me about all the different places that you've lived.
Well, um, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. Go Bucks. My dad finished his PhD and took a job at Slippery Rock, now Slippery Rock University, when I was going into the third grade. But the family always cheered for the Buckeyes. So when it came time to go to college, everything was compared to Ohio State.
Right.
And since I was one of those people who was lucky enough to have parents that were going to pay for tuition, room, and board, I figured, why not go to where the school we've always rooted for?
Right.
And it was 4 hours away from home. Yes. And it was a big school. So I was very much of a loner. I didn't have any friends. I wanted a boy to date me. So a big school like Ohio State, I figured there were lots of people.
Yeah, more options.
Yeah. So, so the second week of school at the Ohio State Oklahoma football game in the fall of 1977, this grad student kept sitting beside me, and thank God he was persistent, because we've been married for 43 years.
Oh,
So, the idea of moving back to Columbus was, a really good choice. And although I graduated in 3 years, he stayed a lot longer and got a master's degree and a PhD that he doesn't use, nor do I use my degree in
I don't use
medieval
my degree either.
studies. I don't know why. Don't we need a medievalist on every corner? But my intention was I was going to be a museum curator, and I knew I would need an advanced degree, so I got through my undergraduate as quickly as possible. I had 1 year in graduate school at Ohio State, where I learned I did not want to be a museum curator. I don't like writing grants. I don't want to read a grant. I do not want to read the fine print of insurance policies or intake forms oh my Lord.
Right.
So anyway, I helped put Steve through the rest of his degree, and he took a job in South Carolina. So in 1980, 6 or 5, something like that, we moved to Columbia, South Carolina for his job as a coastal engineer, which he hated. 3 years later, he joined me in the little business that I had started, framing pictures. And over the years, we grew it to the largest frame shop in South Carolina, probably the Southeast.
Wow. Is that Mouse House or is that different now?
Yeah, that's Mouse House.
Okay.
And by 2001, we had 14 people on payroll.
Wow.
Offering fully covered health insurance, paid vacation, retirement plan. And I worked constantly. And I was never going to get to be an artist when I grew up.
Right.
It was in 2001 where I started forcibly downsizing the business. And I declared that I wanted to be an artist. By 2003, I had gotten an off-site studio and would go there and think, oh my gosh, what have I done? Where are all those ideas that kept me up at night? Oh, this is the biggest mistake. But fortunately, having an off-site studio meant when I went there, I had nothing else to do.
Uh,
I couldn't get distracted by framing another piece. And by the way, the frame shop was the first floor of our house.
mm,
So there was no escaping work except to go to my studio. And I sort of, through trial and error and tears and complaining, taught myself to be an artist.
that's awesome.
And that was a wonderful thing. By 2006, I had my first art residency. And shortly thereafter, I heard of SAQA, Studio Art Quilt Associates.
Hmm.
And I went on the website, and it was like, they have, at that point, it was called PAM. It's now called JAM. And it's their juried artist membership. To me, that was like, oh, so exciting. Peer review.
Mm,
Am I good enough? And so I applied and was immediately accepted. And the resources have been amazing. And the opportunities that came around because of finding additional exhibits to enter,
mhm.
that was amazing. And I've even written articles for the Quarterly Journal.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, in that sense, quilting, art quilting, opened up lots of doors for me to explore.
Right.
Um, and I look at my artwork and I still think I approach everything as an embroiderer. It's just now I use buttons as if they were French knots, and
Mhm.
I'm using quilts because they're really great surfaces for stitch.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, quilting has made a real big difference in my life.
All the different places that you lived, has the location affected your art? Most of your art isn't done in
Oh,
different.
yeah. And I forgot the rest of that answer.
Okay.
You asked me where I'd lived. So we lived
Okay.
in Columbia for 36
Oh,
years.
wow. Okay.
Um, for the last couple, I've been asking Steve, I want to retire. I want to be full time,
Mhm.
not full time artist, then full time picture framer, and going back and forth. I want to retire. Well, you can't retire if your business was the first floor of your house and
Right.
people have been ringing that doorbell for 36 years.
Mm.
You have to run away.
Right.
So, about a year and a half ago, Steve discovered on a real estate site for commercial property a church in the upstate of South Carolina, and we bought it and renovated the former Sunday school rooms and offices into our living area. And my fiber art studio is now literally sanctuary sized.
Oh, wow.
It's the former church of a former textile mill village.
That's
So, in a
amazing.
very real sense, I am surrounded by a history that incorporates fabric and cloth, and lots of women who worked to support their families in the textile industry. And does place affect my work? I don't know. That's a loaded question. Well, in a sense, the grave rubbing quilts were not as affected by where I lived, but definitely by the place, because you have to go to a cemetery to find the grave.
That's true.
um, I can honestly say that I do feel that being an artist has a very spiritual side that feeds your soul, and that now literally stitching in a former church has a unique feel of being truly right.
Mm. That's
You
awesome.
know, yeah, the prayers I say for myself are in places where people have been praying since 1945.
Wow. That's great.
Mhm. So, okay, so that's place, and then I finished the other question. Okay.
Okay, let's see. Oh, your artist residence, your artist in residence. Can you tell me about that? Like, if I was thinking about, that'd be fun to do, but I already have a place at home that I can work. Is there any advantages to going someplace to do art?
Yes. First of all, when I was still framing up until like, at the end of last year, so just over 6 months ago, it was wonderful to go on an art residency because I would never have a client. I would not have to cut a mat. Every day you have one thing on your to-do list, make art. Oh, how wonderful. You're
Right.
not going to be interrupted by the telephone unless it's your husband who absolutely knows it better be really important to call. But you're not going to be answering the business line.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to meet new people. And there's almost always some quilt guild that during the month you can go and meet more people.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are also a lot of these art residencies have the requirement of you donating a piece into their permanent collection.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never a bad thing to have a piece in a collection that will outlive you.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
wonderful.
one of my recent art residencies was with Nuxabee Wildlife Refuge, which is part of the national park system. And it's in Mississippi, where I actually did on multiple occasions get into the provided kayak and go out onto the lake that has alligators.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they required me giving a piece to their permanent collection.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as luck would have it, they were contacted by the Department of Interior that oversees the National Park System because the museum there in Washington, D.C. had lots of things from big places like the Grand Canyon and Arcadia, but some of the smaller locations needed better representation in their museum collection. And Nuxabee asked me if I would like to contribute to
Oh,
that.
that's so nice.
So I have my second piece in a national museum. The
Wow.
first one is the Textile Museum, also in DC. But last year, one of my pieces was taken into the Museum of the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. This would never have happened unless I had that art residency.
Mm. That's a great honor. Congratulations.
Mhm. Yeah. So that's one of the other real great reasons is you're placing a piece
Mm-hmm.
often in a location that's going to take care of it
Mm-hmm.
and, and have it stick around for maybe a couple generations or more.
Right. And they understand the significance of your art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the time and the place. Like I said earlier, my very first art residency resulted in the entire series of the grave rubbing art quilts and an installation called Last Words. It wouldn't have happened if I'd been at home where I know where everything is and I know, the mailman, you
Right.
have a routine that something that unexpected, that opportunity, it's probably not going to come around. So,
Right.
and there have been other art residencies that have been similar, either started a new series or embraced a new idea um, or even again, I wrote an article for the Southwood Journal about art residencies,
Uh-huh.
how to get one, what are the pitfalls, what are some of the things that you could do in advance to help your application make it to the final round.
Right. Is it hard to get into one?
Some of them are exceptionally difficult.
Mm.
Um, a couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, I was a finalist for Shenandoah. They had Zoom interview calls like this with 12 people for 6 spots. I made the 12 people. I did not get the spot. But I made 12 people out of an application entry of, like 800. So it was like, okay, yeah, it's really hard to get that art residency. I have really loved all of the artist residencies I've gone on, some have I would never recommend.
My name is Shelina. This channel, Quilt and Color, is a variety show all about quilting. Please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the videos.
And yet I learned something. There was one, I'm not even going to mention it, but I nearly froze to death. There was an outhouse. I knew that in advance, but I did not know there would not be the heat. It was terrible, but I learned such a valuable lesson. I learned how fabulous it feels to be clean, warm, and dry. It's something that in my day-to-day life, like most people I know, you
Yeah.
take it for granted. And
Yeah.
yet, when you think about the world, there are a lot of people that aren't clean, warm, or dry,
That's
or at least
true.
one of those things, and they're suffering, and you know what it feels like. And yeah, it was a lesson in gratefulness.
Yeah, it's
But
easy to take those kinds of things for granted.
mhm,
You don't have
yeah.
them.
So, every art residency I've ever done has been a unique experience. And I've got applications out there, so I might go someplace else. The
Oh.
other thing about an art residency, some
Mhm.
of them, of course, are easier to get into because they come with fees.
Mhm.
It's this much per week.
Mhm.
I'm only applying for those that don't charge me to be there. Of
Mhm.
course, I am willing to pay for my transportation there and back, and
Mhm.
my food even while I am there.
Right.
And yet, some of the art residencies I've been on have provided the food and even a weekly stipend.
Mhm.
And such was a residency that was about this time last year at a place just north of Sleepy Hollow
Mhm.
uh, in the Hudson River Valley called Bethany Arts Center.
Mhm.
But for this residency, you needed a proposal of what work you were going to do.
Mhm.
And it was the time that I had to start my lace forest installation. I just needed dedicated time to make enough to get it going.
I
And this,
recognize that one. What's your waste forest one?
oh, the lace forest, well, it's new because I only started it last October.
Okay.
Um, I have acquired a lot of lace, and by that I mean yardage, but
Mhm.
also lace tablecloths and crocheted, all sorts of stuff. And I've cut these things into strips. Some of the strips are as short as 10 inches up to 18 inches. And I'm hand stitching them
Mm.
onto a 8 foot length of 1 inch in diameter upholstery cord.
Oh,
The
okay.
idea is that I'm creating what would look like a strand of a kelp forest. And
Okay.
the kelp forest in the Monterey Aquarium that I saw like 20 years ago is the inspiration.
Mhm.
And, it takes a full day to stitch that many little strands up this upholstery cord.
Right.
Uh, and even as I was there, I was invited to a show at Featherstone Gallery on Martha's Vineyard Island for
Oh.
this past June,
Mhm.
which was just awesome. Because when you're working in installation, I suppose they're famous artists. One of the ones I admire, Leslie Dill. I'm sure she can scribble an idea on a paper napkin and get a major museum to fund her next, installation. I don't have that reputation. The only way I'm going to get an opportunity to show an installation is if I have pictures.
Mhm.
So having that opportunity was wonderful.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to mount it in a very small chapel and let people walk in among the strands of lace and even shoot a video. And I've submitted this installation and I'm hoping for future opportunities. But again, I needed to get at least, 10 or 15 of these strands stitched
Right.
so that I could take them to this other location and mount them. I had 30 at that point and have acquired enough lace for at least another 30.
Wow.
So, but I needed the 2 weeks to get it started.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and to put it out there so I could have the opportunity to show it and get the pictures that I need.
Right.
Art is hard.
Yeah. It takes a long time.
Art is hard.
Yeah.
Uh, selling art is hard. Making art is hard. Being inspired is hard. And trying not to be overwhelmed by all the beautiful things that other people are making is hard too.
That's true. That's true. Because I've looked at your stained art, your
Yeah.
stained glass work, and I've always wanted to do it. I still haven't tried it yet, but it's like I want to try that technique.
Mhm. Um, it's it was the result of a workshop I took years ago, even before, right about the time I was getting my first studio. And I had this workshop at Callaway Gardens in Georgia with Jan Beanie and Jean Littlejohn, two very renowned British fiber artists who were teaching there. They were using soldering irons to make marks on synthetics.
Okay.
It was very interesting. I did very well in the workshop. I enjoyed it thoroughly. But as I was driving clear across Georgia on my way home, I was thinking, do I really want to buy another tool? I think a lot of people get sidetracked to their art studio practice by trying something else new, buying something else, adding to their stash. These are avoidance techniques to actual making. And part of my inspiration is the art of tribal communities and indigenous people who didn't go and get an academic degree, because I don't have an academic degree, but made use of what was there. They don't stop because, well, I need this color. No, you find something else that works.
Right.
That's very much me. So I was thinking, I don't want to buy another tool. I might never use it. And I'm like, okay, but I have a heat gun. Of course I have a heat gun. I have a frame shop. What do you think shrink wrap is? The heat shrinks, so I have a heat gun. I wonder what would happen if I put together synthetics and held it together only with cotton thread and then zapped it with a heat gun. I wonder if it would work. And then I wouldn't have to buy a soldering iron. So it was only one harebrained idea on a drive home. And there was only one way to know if it would work.
Try it out.
Try it out. Now, of course, the first piece was itty bitty, but it worked. So immediately, how big can I get? What else can I do? And I have been making them ever since with all sorts of departures, because the more you make something, the more ideas come to you as to how you could do it differently or better, maybe monochromatically. And that's how the stained glass evolved. Because at first I was only doing the inbox pieces, little squares or rectangles. And people said, oh, they look like stained glass. And I thought, well, if I cut this stuff into shapes that better emulate stained glass, maybe I can make them look like stained glass. And yeah, you can.
Yeah.
So
that's gorgeous.
Later, well, what if I don't machine stitch them with cotton thread, but hand stitch them together with embroidery floss? And that works too. So that series has been going on for a long, long time. But it came out of that idea of, I don't want to buy a soldering iron. Of course, when the experiment worked, I found several soldering irons in different sizes. And yeah, my mask, because fumes from melting synthetics are, you shouldn't breathe them in. So yeah, that's just one of those what if ideas that took off. And yeah, whether it's a stained glass or the blocks, monochromatic, all sorts of colorful things, There are still experiments that I have in the back of my mind. I've always used black felt or earlier on purple. I don't know why. But what if I use white? I have yet to do that. I have yet to do a lot of different things that I know I could try.
Have you tried a wash away stabilizer?
Oh, I've used a wash away stabilizer for another body of work. In fact, my leaf dress won the top recycling award a number of years ago in a wearable art show in Vancouver, Canada. This was another idea from after the grave rubbings. Like I said, one idea, it grows into another. While you're in the cemetery and there are artificial flowers blowing in the wind or just sitting in the trash and they look brand new. I've never taken flowers off of a grave.
Right.
Please know that. But on Mother's Day evening, right before dusk, when the cemetery closes, you can frequently drive through the cemetery and take all the trash away. All sorts of artificial flowers. Right, because that's when lots of people visit the cemetery and bring new flowers and throw out the old ones.
Right.
And then you can dissect them and wash them and then put them on wash away stabilizer in a grid and add more flowers and create wearable garments that are literally only artificial flowers created from cemetery dumpsters and thread. Those garments have no garment underneath to which I just attach stuff. They are literally the fabric. So I've used the wash away that way. I've also used tear away.
Okay.
I have fused photos to muslin and tacked them to tear away and with space between them. And then free motion stitched the grid, attaching all of it, and then tear away. This has created what I call the grid of photos, which is part of a installation called Anonymous Ancestors.
Yeah, I love
That
that.
piece is like 6 feet by 15.5 feet. But I've also used it to create a wearable garment called the Class of 49, which is basically paper, but paper attached to fabric. And because there's space between the pieces of paper, it form fits.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll try just about anything. Not all of my experiments work. But if you try enough of them, you'll have a good enough success rate.
That's true. I was just thinking about the wash away for your stained glass. Like if I guess I was worried about the fumes from the heat gun from the plastic. So if a wash away would maybe help with that, I don't know. I guess it
I
wouldn't
have
have the
no
texture.
idea.
It probably wouldn't have the body, the
Mm-hmm.
texture that you would have.
Probably not. And I don't know how that would work, but hey, try it. It's not an idea I'm going to go with, but it could take you on an amazing journey. It is that series that got me proper gallery representation and into both the Philadelphia Museum of Art craft show multiple times. And I've twice also been in the Smithsonian show. So yeah, one harebrained idea. And it led to all of this plus workshops. So I always tell other artists, act on those harebrained ideas. One of them is bound to work.
Is there anything else that you want, any other artwork that you want to talk about your series? Maybe your mandala?
Well, you did mention the mandalas, which is the series that I started during the pandemic. And there are several reasons for that series. First of all, the very first piece finished in 2020 was a huge piece, and I love it dearly. It is an antique crazy quilt to which I stitched anonymous photos that I have fused to paper and stitched onto this quilt with all sorts of trinkets, beads and pins and clock gears and um, all sorts of things. And it's called Crazy. It's huge. It's the full Crazy quilt. And then, of course, we know what happened in 2020.
Right.
The world went digital. The art world went virtual. In-person opportunities dissolved. I was really sad. I got a piece in Art Quilt Elements. Yeah, that had to go online.
Mm.
Well, unfortunately, I looked at my Crazy quilt, and the full picture on your phone or even on your computer screen, well, it's busy. It lacks a strong graphic design that would make you on your phone, make you want to go like this and enlarge.
Mm.
It would be just like next, and I'm like, oh, but it was fantastic. And I so loved making it. And I wanted to continue resurrecting some of these old quilts that I had with found objects. And that's when I thought about the mandalas.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, concentric circles have been age-old ways of making something in a meditative practice.
Mm-hmm.
If you're stitching a ring of buttons, you know when it's going to end, but as soon as you stitch that last button down, there is no beginning, there is no end.
Right.
But the result is a strong graphic element that
That's
would
right.
make someone on the phone want to enlarge it.
Mm.
So at the beginning of the well, it wasn't really at the beginning of the pandemic. It was more toward the time when vaccines became available. I had this one blue and white quilt, and I said, I'll cut this quilt up and I'll make this idea. I'll act on this Mandela series.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought it would go beyond that one quilt. Only there was something I truly love,
Right.
both the hunt for the found objects and the knowledge that I'm taking quilts that are well beyond their life as a bed covering.
Mm-hmm.
I only buy the ones that are tattered, the dog ate a corner, they're otherwise damaged,
Mm-hmm.
the neglected ones, the ones that have problems.
Mm-hmm.
At auction, I do not bid more than $17.50.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody gives that $20 bill, fine, you take it. It
Right.
must have a few more days left as a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
I want the broken ones. Now, how am I using them? There's a layer of bridle tool, netting, over the top of all the quilts before I start. So any fragile seams or threadbare areas, they're not going to be, coming apart any further.
Mm-hmm.
And I love making them. I absolutely do. By the time I finished with that one blue and white quilt, I was already collecting stuff like mad, cutting up other quilts. It was a series that truly took off, and I still really enjoy it. I've had several commissions, including one by Steinway of the Carolinas.
Mm-hmm.
They sold one of the quilts that included a felt hammer from inside of a piano, and they contacted me and said, oh, we love that, but we would like one made with only Steinway parts.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's nice. Where am I going to get a Steinway? And they're like, oh, we'll give you one. I'm like, a Steinway? And and that's when I learned that if the soundboard is broken on most pianos, even most Steinways, it is more expensive to repair than to replace.
Yeah.
So I drove up to Charlotte in the cargo van, and they put an upright Steinway in the back of it with real ivory keys.
Oh, wow.
And I made 3 different pieces using that Steinway. It was a commission. I said first refusal. I'm not sharing with you what I'm going to do with it. I'm just going to make 3, and I will offer them to you first. If you don't like them, don't buy them. They bought all 3.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I've had several other commissions too. And it's fun to have a commission because the pieces you're stitching down,
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea is to give second life to these quilts and to these found objects.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting that second life and going to someone that really loves them.
Right.
I've had a longtime friend who I haven't seen in years. She moved to Minneapolis. Send me her childhood quilt.
Mm,
Believe me, it should never have been on a bed but it was falling apart. But it was another blue and white one. And she also sent a yellow one that was a double wedding ring.
mhm,
And I love both of them. And but that first one, making it for her with some of the few things she had sent, was really special to me because I knew it was going to be loved and passed down to her kids. Again, something that is going to outlast me.
mhm.
And that's important to me.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Susan. Hopefully we'll get
Okay.
to talk again because I really enjoyed this conversation. If
Mhm.
people want to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
My email addresses are on my website.
Okay.
And one is mouse_house@prodigy.net. And that is my preferred one, though. There is one, Susan@susanlenz.com, but it's one that came with the website and it's kind of crappy.
Okay.
Uh, but I even list my telephone number on social media.
Okay.
As an artist, I know that's ridiculous, but I want to be found.
Right.
So thank you for finding me.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm,
So you sell artwork and you still do installations, right? And you still do artist
mhm.
residencies. Do you have any classes that you have? Are you still?
I just signed a contract with a guild. I don't remember the name. Needles is in it, but it's outside of Chicago for next year. That right now is the only class that I have scheduled for sure coming up.
Okay.
Now that I've moved to this church and have a sanctuary sized fiber art studio, there's a high possibility that I would teach one-on-one privately here.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm. Of course, I am located like not really anywhere. I'm near Clemson. That's about if you follow football, you've heard of Clemson University.
Yeah.
I'm about 5 miles from there.
Okay. But that's a nice
But
rural area, good place to go get away from things.
it is. And also, if you email me or contact me through social media, I usually do write back rather quickly. Um, when I told my parents I wanted to be a museum curator when I was still in high school, they were horrified. Not that the college education was involved. I was going to college from the time I was born.
Hmm.
Um, Dad's a college professor.
Yeah.
But, at that point back then, how many female curators were there?
Right.
So they said, in order to be really prepared, you need not just a half year of typing, you need 2 years of executive typing so that you can be in that cubicle in some museum basement as a secretary waiting for someone to die so
Uh,
that you might curate something. Well, I never went into the museum curating, but I am so glad I have 2 years of executive typing because I don't know where any of the letters are, but my fingers know the words. I type
right.
about 100 words a minute, so I will write back.
Yeah. I type really fast too.
Yeah, it was the most valuable course in high school.
Yeah,
Was
that was my first job was typing.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what I would do, without the typing. There were a lot of artists that I knew that were older than me in the last, well, starting about 20 years ago, that you know they just couldn't keep up with technology. And I think one of the main reasons was they henpecked. It made it hard,
Hmm.
and thank God I typed. So I will write back.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Susan Lenz Dingman as much as I did. Be sure to check out the other interviews I've done on this channel. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all of your support, and I'll see you in the next video.